The signs of economic hardship are flashing like strobe lights. Yet, like Hannibal and his elephants, the Biden administration and his slack-jawed pop news lackeys remain steadfast and unrelenting in their totalitarian trampling of reality, in their preposterous claim that things are going great for you when you frequent a grocery store and try to feed your family. From the Wall Street Journal editorializing on the rising emergency of unsustainable government spending and government debt crowding out savings, even as federal tax revenue rose 7% year to year, to Citadel economist and Professor Richard Ebeling and Future of Freedom President Jacob Hornberger discussing the cost of living pressures that the DC graft machine is placing on millions of Americans. Many people are trying to sound the alarms. Even BlackRock head Larry Fink has warned about double-digit annual price increases caused by the inflation of the money supply that the Federal Reserve conducts in order to facilitate the feeding of the government pork beast. Well, this situation is doubly frustrating, not only because of the anti-constitutional pork projects and unabashed hubris of Biden's gang telling us what is best for the economy. It also is frustrating because the Bidenistas have it in their power to undo many of their disastrous diktats that have made life harder and more expensive. Let's take a critical look at 5 ways the Biden administration could stop laying pressure on your food bill. 5 things that also indicate just how poisonous their standing policies are. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV, and here are the 5 ways that Biden could act now to lower your food bills. Number 1, stop paying farmers not to farm. In the insane and unconstitutional tradition of FDR-era programs like paying farmers to destroy crops and paying swine herds to kill and discard pigs, and in the nutty tradition of George W. Bush's administration funding plum growers to destroy plum trees, did you know that since 2018, the feds have been paying farmers to not farm on vast portions of their land? It's called the Natural Resources Conservation Service. The feds planted the new payoff scheme as part of their 2018 Farm Bill, and the Dem Rhino Gang in DC amped it up with more so-called incentives of our money when they passed the insultingly titled Inflation Reduction Act, put into motion in August of 2022. Since that time, in fiscal years 2023 and 2024, the feds have handed powerful agricultural interests over $21 billion to stop growing on sizable portions of their land. Either that or to sell the land or to give the big agricultural interests technical assistance, as they call it. We're talking 180,000 farms. And according to the feds, at least 225 million acres subsidized to go unused for 10 to 15-year periods. The U.S. Department of Agriculture actually openly admits the crime. Quote, the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, generally provides 10 to 15-year contracts to remove land from agricultural production. Most of the land enrolled in the CRP was in crop production prior to CRP enrollment and to an approved conservation cover, such as a mixture of grasses and trees. You know, reducing farmland means lower than could be had yield, which means less of the products consumers might want, which means higher costs for you and me. in addition to the fact that the Biden gang is making us pay taxes and is pressuring the Federal Reserve to print more money for this perverse depletion of crop yields. Aha! Number 2, roll back corn-based ethanol mandates. In June of 2022 and in December of 2023, the Biden administration also perversely incentivized changes in field space allocation when it answered the call of corn conglomerates and mandated an increased amount of corn-based ethanol to be used in our fuel. That helps the corn interests, but it hurts us because it crowds out other forms of agriculture that can be put to growing edible food and getting it on our table. As I wrote in 2007 for the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE, when the W. Bush administration mandated an increase of corn-based ethanol in our fuel blends back then, Fidel Castro, of all people, correctly noted that such manipulation of the agricultural sectors in the United States would see less edible corn and other products such as beans being grown on those U.S. farms, and that it would lead to higher food prices. Corn-derived ethanol, as opposed to sugar beet ethanol, which is used in some other nations, also is a net energy loser, requiring more energy to plant, sow, and reap the corn, and then refine it and transport it, than what it actually offers when burned. It also is problematic in cooler weather because burning ethanol creates molecules that linger in low altitudes in cool temperatures, creating smog. 3. Stop waging war on American energy. You know, fuel for creating fertilizers, transporting food and other products, for electricity, and for heat is much more expensive due to Biden diktats. Indeed, when it comes to those corn growers, whom I mentioned earlier, it's a natural next step to note that even they are experiencing higher costs to run their equipment and transport their products because the Biden administration has been hell-bent to become the worst and most immoral, anti-constitutional stranglers of energy availability since the Nixon administration. From its most restrictive in history offshore drilling stance to its blocks on Russian energy that could reduce prices, to its new increase in the cost of drilling on so-called federal land. And of course, there's no provision in the Constitution for the feds to so-called own that land anyway. Well, they keep raising our expenses, and it is obvious. But in addition to the higher costs Biden creates through restricting energy for operation of farms and businesses, the higher costs for our home heat and the energy needed to run grocery stores, and even higher costs for transportation, there's the fact that, as I noted in January of 2022, many fertilizers either include nitrogen derived as a byproduct of natural gas services, or the actual clay needed for some fertilizers can only be made at high heat, also requiring the burning of fuel. This has caused even what I mentioned earlier, the corn growers, to run into high costs for fertilizer, and it sucks away more of our money at the store. By the way, in Europe, government attacks on nitrogen fertilizer have destroyed the livelihoods of thousands of farmers. So much for increasing productivity and the competitive power of the market, huh? You know, if Biden dropped the existing policies restricting energy imports, drilling, and transportation via things like the Keystone XL pipeline, we could eliminate a massive pressure on our wallets and maybe think about affording family meals again. Number 4, cut useless red tape on the meat industry. You know, the fuel and energy portion of the economy is just one of our problems. The feds also force onto food producers so many mandates, one would need a book to cover them all. But as an example, consider how much more fish costs because the federal government mandates that fishermen literally house what they call fish counters on their boats. And the feds recently told fishermen that they had to pay the counters $700 to $800 a day. This, many fishermen are challenging in the U.S. Supreme Court. And then there's the USDA mandate that organic chickens must be given a certain amount of space to roam outside the hutch. And of course, the long-standing federal command that small farmers can't slaughter cattle for willing customers on their own farms, but instead must send the cattle to federally licensed mega slaughter corporations. That edict not only increases the price of food, it increases the risk that dirty meat can infect larger portions of the population. Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, has actually introduced legislation called the Prime Act to end this mandate, but he hasn't been able to pass the bill so far. Number 5, end the federal minimum wage. Not only is it unconstitutional that the feds tell employers that they must pay a certain amount, yeah, that lovely arbitrary diktat of politicians, rather than the politicians leaving office and starting their own businesses to offer salaries they would like to see people earn. Well, it's also immoral and anti-economic. When business owners are told they must increase pay for work that just simply wouldn't be valued that much by consumers, employers try many ways to deal with the government-imposed expense. Sometimes they eat a portion by reducing their own salary. Often they lay off employees, and within the new government-mandated margins, they invest in technology that they would not have utilized if they could have used human help for less. Often, they incorporate much of those higher costs into higher prices, especially when American consumers aren't allowed to buy cheaper alternatives because every business is seeing higher employee costs due to the minimum wage, and the feds also block cheap imports via tariffs. The answer is not to increase tariffs. The answer is to lower the burden on the American employers. And as many economists will note, we are actually the final employers. Of course, all of this is happening within a sphere of out-of-control federal spending that pushes a new $1 trillion in debt approximately every 100 days. That spending relies on taxation and on the issuance of bonds, which are purchased by the Federal Reserve, which itself creates worthless money to do it. That money competes against the money we already have, and it bids up prices. You want to help us, Joe? Leave us alone. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up, whether you're watching on Rumble, where they don't censor us, and please follow us there, or you're watching on YouTube, where sometimes they do censor us. And please share the videos far and wide with as many people you think might be interested in this. Post it on your social media, wherever you can. Spread the word. You can find us at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org, and open up another tab and check out what's happening over there while you have the opportunity. You can also find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, on Twitter/X. And if you want to contact me, I am on Gab as @GardnerGoldsmith, and on X, I'm @GuardGoldsmith. And by the way, when you visit the MRCTV.org site, check out the MRC Store to find out some of the great things you can purchase and consider donating to the Media Research Center. Thanks for watching. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.
I want to invite you as my guest on a very special, once-in-a-lifetime, 7-day post-election cruise in the Caribbean. It's going to be a blast.